All right, Jason, you ready to unveil those Big 12 predictions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Jason's made his predictions on the Big 12. And of course, we're coming off a season in which Oklahoma was dethroned for the first time since 2014. Within, one score of getting back to a Big 12 championship game. But it was Baylor, Oklahoma State playing a classic down to the wire. And a lot of people like Oklahoma State and Baylor. But it seems as though as we've progressed through the offseason that Oklahoma's getting a little bit more attention and a little bit more of a lean nationally from what I've seen. But we saw them line up in both the coaches in the AP poll pretty much 1, 2, and 3 right in a row. So it's expected to be razor close between those three. And then, of course, we've got the wild card of Texas, and we could consider maybe Kansas State the dark horse. But Jason, we can start at the bottom if that works well for you.
Yep, that works good.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, I mean, so with Kansas, I actually do. I've talked about this with a couple of people. I do think Leopold is really the right man for the job. I think he's got them trending in a positive way, but they're still just not very talented. I think they've got a couple of guys on the offensive side of the ball, a couple of guys on the defensive side of the ball that probably would play, for most of the schools in the Big 12. But there's just, there's just not a lot of opportunities for victories this year, specifically when you think about how balanced this Big 12 schedule, this Big 12 is this year. I mean, I think they have one automatic win, and I think they've probably got 2 wins. They'll probably have to, they do host TCU on October 8th. That's a possibility. They host Iowa State on the 1st. There's always going to be a game where they're, the other team's not really interested in playing, and they play well, and that kind of. But they host Tennessee Tech, and then they on September 2nd, first Friday night of the season, and then they host Duke, which I think Duke is probably one of the worst P5 teams in the country this year. So I think 2 to 3 wins, but just to expect much more than that just yet is probably a little bit too much.
Over the second half of last season, Oklahoma State just completely buried them 55-3. But besides that, starting with that Oklahoma scare, and again, everybody remembers it here, Oklahoma with the ball just about to get stopped with Kansas only down less than a score to take over the football with about 3 or 4 minutes left to play. Caleb Williams made a heady play, and Oklahoma hung on and capped it off with a touchdown to put it away. But, that was dicey with 3 or 4 minutes left in the game. And after that, they beat Texas. They only lost to TCU by a field goal, 31-28, and they only lost to West Virginia 34-28. So they were extremely competitive the final 5 or 6 games of last season.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it would be fun as an outsider just to see Kansas do something, win a few games. All right, at number 9, a West Virginia team that finished at I messed that up. They went 6-7. They were 6-6, went to a bowl game, lost to Minnesota. West Virginia coming off a 6-7 year, and of course their headliners, the acquisition of JT Daniels at quarterback.
Yeah, so West Virginia is a team that I've seen some have them at this spot. I've seen some have them, sort of kind of the middle of the road here for West Virginia. It's interesting. They have a pretty tough schedule. 3 of their first 5 games are on the road with, they start off at Pitt, and then back-to-back weeks, the 22nd, October 1st, they go to Virginia Tech and Texas, and then after a bye week, then they host Baylor. So I think you've got an opportunity for maybe a 3-3 or a 2-4 start right there, which could be a situation where it could steamroll just a bit. But I think the fact that the they've lost a bit of a talent on the offensive side of the ball. Letty Brown from a running back perspective, and there's been a lot of injuries. From a quarterback perspective as well throughout his career. So it's is he going to be able to make it through a full season? So I could certainly see them being anywhere from 6 to 9, I think. But I think based on what I've seen defensively, and then just kind of a schedule perspective, I've got West Virginia here at 9.
They also lose their top receiver, Winston Wright, 63 catches. He left for Florida State, was in an off-field incident, not his fault, an accident, a car accident that's put his football career in jeopardy. But Winston Wright, they lose him. To your point about JT Daniels, this isn't like he had one season where he got hurt and people are concerned about injury history. 2018, 19, 20, 21. That's 4 consecutive years he has not been able to play a football season. So that's an injury history. 4 consecutive years where 2018, he basically made it through the season. Then since then, 19, 20, and 21, then has not been able to make it through the season. Jason, sounds like you need to catch our West Virginia show on Friday night. All those guys say they're going 10-2.
Yeah, this is my deep apologies to my my buddy Travis Kenobi. I'm sure
Yes.
He'll have something for me. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's just, I mean, exactly to your point. He hasn't shown a single year that he's been able to be healthy throughout the season. So I think, if he stays healthy for the entire season, offensive line plays well, they can develop some wide receivers and some running backs. I think they have an opportunity to, I mean, not be 10-2, but they have an opportunity to be a lot better, but we'll see how it goes.
At number 8, new head coach Joey McGuire. Kind of an interesting hire there. And this is not a criticism on Joey McGuire because I know little about him, except he was a linebackers coach at Baylor. That usually doesn't elevate you to a Power 5 head coaching position. He might do a really good job. But Texas Tech fired Matt Wells after a 5-3 start and a 1-point loss to Kansas State. But Texas Tech at 7-6, coming off a bowl win against Mississippi State.
I look at Texas Tech in a very similar way than I do with West Virginia, and I give Texas Tech a little bit of the benefit just because they host West Virginia from a scheduling perspective. But again, you look at their early season schedule: Houston at NC State, they host Texas, they go to Kansas State, and they go to Oklahoma State. Their first 6 games of the year. You could see a situation where they could start 1-5. They do host Houston, so certainly they got a puncher's chance there. And then they host Texas, but at Kansas State and at Oklahoma State will be really tough games for them to win. Certainly at NC State will as well. So I do like what Joey McGuire has been doing. We have a writer that covers Texas Tech, and I think from an excitement perspective, they have. He's brought a lot more excitement to Lubbock, which is a very difficult place to recruit, and so he's done a really good job here early on in the 2023 cycle from a recruiting perspective. So I think all signs point to him. Even though he's a new head coach, I think all signs point to him, being a really good recruiter, and we'll see how that goes on the field this year. But yeah, I mean that schedule kind of again for me, it's a little bit worrisome for me. So if they get off to such a bad start, where that could snowball.
A couple advantages that Texas Tech has over West Virginia. Number one, not necessarily a better starting quarterback, but they've got 2 experienced quarterbacks. So if one of them gets hurt, they've got another one. Donovan Smith is the runner, 7 touchdowns, 2 picks, but he's more of a runner guy. And then Tyler Shook was the starting quarterback at Oregon, and he split time with Smith last year. And they've got their top 4 rushers coming back, including Sir Roderick Thompson, who scored 10 touchdowns. So Texas Tech looking to get back to a bowl this season. Then at number 7, Sonny Dykes, TCU.
Yeah, so with TCU, you're going to see almost a 180 in terms of the team that you've seen in the past versus what this team is going to look like in 2022. They're going to throw the ball around a lot. I believe they have named, I think I saw that a few days ago or last week, where they named Chandler Morris as the starting quarterback for TCU. Oh, somebody can tell me if I'm wrong, but I thought, unless I was dreaming, I thought I saw that. So yeah, they're going to throw the ball around a lot. I got one of the best wide receivers in the Big 12. They got a really explosive true freshman guy that's going to enter into the mix as well. And so again, with them, you've got schedule isn't quite as tough up front. You got a little bit of a tricky game in week 1 when you go to Colorado, but I'm not super high on Colorado. I think they're probably, outside of Arizona, probably got the least amount of talent in the Pac-12 overall. And then you go to SMU, and then you host Oklahoma on October 1st. So that's always an interesting game for Oklahoma, given it's the week before Red River. But so you have an opportunity to start, to start fairly well. Towards the end of the season, the schedule gets a little bit tougher when you go to in 4 weeks, in a 4-week span. You go to West Virginia, host Texas Tech, at Texas, and at Baylor. So I think that could be a little bit tricky. So they've got to be better early on in the season. But with Chandler Morris at the quarterback position, I think this team has an opportunity to put up a lot of points. Not sure how good they're going to be on the defensive side of the ball, without having that culture and that foundation of Gary Patterson there anymore. But I think this is a team that probably has the opportunity to get back to a bowl game this year.
Yeah, I don't know what happened with this program over the past 3 or 4 years. Gary Patterson obviously created this to be one of the great group of 5 programs in various stops, various conferences, and then they enter the Big 12. It takes them a couple of years to get up to speed, and then they have a tremendous football program in 2013, 14, 15, in that range, go to a Big 12 championship game in 17, and that was pretty much their last hurrah. They've leveled out to be very mediocre since then. So maybe he just kind of lost his steam and fire as a head coach, and he's moved on. But obviously, he's had one of the great coaching careers in history. And I see that they've got, despite not great players, a lot of production back, rushing and receiving. Their top players, except Zach Evans, who was a huge 5-star commit for them and ran for 7+ yards per carry the last 2 seasons. He's off to Ole Miss, and they've got both quarterbacks, Chandler Morris and Max Duggan back. I don't know, Jason, that there's a team in the country that has lost more significant production than Iowa State. They're like a new team this year.
They really are, Mark. Last year there was a lot of people that were on the Iowa State bandwagon, and they were, I believe, top 10 in the country preseason. So they really went to an unfamiliar territory in terms of being more of the hunted than being the hunter, and so they didn't necessarily handle that all that well. To your point here on the screen, 7-6, where this team was. Most had them projected at the very least New Year's Six bowl game. Some had them as an outside chance to go to be in a playoff spot. So when you look at how this has, to your point, how this has kind of flipped the switch a little bit, I think they're back into that more familiar underdog, disrespected role. I think some of the things I think they like, even though they lost Breece Hall, I think they're like their running back room from a totality perspective more than they have in the past. A little jury's out a little bit on Hunter Deckers from a quarterback perspective, what he's able to bring to the table. But this is a team as well that has an opportunity here. They play Iowa, second game of the year. They've got Southeast Missouri, and it's it's mind-boggling to me. Whoever they play in the first game of the year, they always struggle with. FCS, FBS, whoever it is, they have had struggles with Northern Iowa in the past on a couple of occasions, and they've just not performed super well. So I would expect that to be somewhat of a struggle, but they win that game. But then, they got Iowa week 2, but then they've got, a couple of games, particularly at home. They host Ohio, host Baylor, go to Kansas, host Kansas State. So I think they have an opportunity to win a few games there. But I think, and then they host Oklahoma again, host Texas Tech, and then they have TCU to end the season, or not next to the last game of this. Oh no, it is end of the season. So I think this team, obviously, they're going to be a bowl game, our bowl team as well. But yeah, it's such an unknown because, to your point, exactly, they have such a different roster and they lost and so much. But I think they're in the familiar role of being that underdog, and then they'll cherish that.
Couple pillars that return for the Cyclones on offense. Xavier Hutchinson, if you're a Big 12 fan, you've seen him play a lot. He caught the 83 balls last year, so he's the one holdover from a team that lost the offensive line that was supposed to be one of the best in the country, one of the best running backs in the country, one of the best tight ends in the country, their starting quarterback, and then on defense, Will McDonald coming back with 11 sacks. Now we possibly, Jason, get to a point where maybe some fringe contention, some possibilities, a dark horse here or there. Kansas State 8-5 with a bowl win over LSU last year.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right in terms of the contention. I think you could make everyone, and this is the one thing that makes me, I guess, a little bit nervous about Kansas State is everyone's on their bandwagon this year. They've got, when you look at, from a Big 12, from a national perspective, there's a lot of people that give them, a puncher's chance of making it to Arlington, from a Big 12 championship game perspective. So I think that they have one of the best running backs in the Big 12, one of the best, probably underappreciated running backs in the country, at Deuce Vaughn. Great runner, obviously a great pass catcher out of the backfield. I still don't. I think what could get them from an 8-win season, I think they've got almost an automatic 8 wins on their schedule. Could see them get to 9 or 10. I think the difference is what kind of Adrian Martinez do they get this year? Is he fully healthy? He probably had one of the best games of his career against Oklahoma last year. But what is, and some of this does a great, it's a huge help for some of these kids just to be in a new environment. But does he cut the turnovers down? Is he more efficient? If he is, then I could see a situation where he could get to the Kansas State, could get to the Big 12 championship game. But I just don't have enough trust in him just yet to vault them from 5 to 2.
Adrian Martinez came to Nebraska with a reputation of being this amazing playmaker, as being a difference maker, a special player. And this is no knock on Adrian Martinez. He's not a special player. He's good. He's a mobile quarterback. He has plenty of arm strength. He's a serviceable quarterback that makes too many mistakes. Now, does he make too many mistakes because he has not been properly developed and given that kind of direction? Or is it just Adrian Martinez? His rate of mistakes has decreased. He's gotten better, but he still makes them in critical situations. They almost upset Wisconsin last year. He throws a pick in double coverage at the goal line to end the game. He throws a pick in overtime against Michigan State. Again, they're about ready to upset a top 10 team in the country. Throws a pick in overtime. He fumbles again. It just on and on and on. The year before, they're driving for the winning score at Iowa, and he waits way too long in the pocket, strip sack, blindside, holds onto the ball too long. He, against Illinois, they're driving for the tying score. They're down by 8, season opener last year. He should know where he is in the pocket, and he gets strip sacked, game over. This is like just over and over. So is it him, or is it coaching and direction. We shall see if Chris Kleiman can do anything with him. Deuce Vaughn is amazing. Fun back to watch. The one thing I will say about him, though, if you watch him against the better defensive fronts, to your point about Oklahoma needing the offensive line to play well, he needs an offensive line because he's a little guy. He's not going to like just be able to pound for three when there's nothing there. He needs a little space. And so it's big for the offensive line. They have a tremendous front seven.
Mm-hmm.
They're an airtight team fundamentally. They're going to be really good and a tough out. I'm interested to see if Martinez can play. If he gives them a 23-24 touchdown, 6 or 7 pick season, then they might scare some people.
Absolutely.
Here's our wild card in the bunch, but they've lost half a team in the last week.
Right. So with Texas, before fall started, I actually had them at number 3 and almost even considered them at number 2. But now I thought very strongly about having them at number 5 and having Kansas State. I don't know that there's a team. I don't know that there's a team in the country has had a worse fall camp than Texas has, and a team that absolutely could not afford. And to your point, some of them were related to injuries, to just critical injuries from Isaiah Nayer, and then the offensive line. The name of the offensive lineman escapes me, but then Roschon Johnson got hurt as well. I know his wasn't quite as serious from the things, and I get some things here just kind of regionally. I think consistently the offensive line has been horrendous in fall camp and scrimmages, to the point, Mark, they're probably going to march out at least 2 and maybe 3 freshmen on the offensive line. And that's just a disaster. I've seen, it looks like they just announced Quinn Ewers as the starting quarterback. I had seen as of recent that there was speculation based on reps and practices and stuff that Hudson Card was going to be the guy, which again would lead me to more of a concern. But from a positive perspective, they've got tons of talent at the skill position. Even with losing Isaiah Nayer, they still got a lot of good solid wide receivers. But whether it would have been Card or Ewers, but specifically for Ewers, he's absolutely extremely unproven. He's very, very much hyped, but he's unproven. I've heard, and Texas people that watch this will probably hate this comparison, but I've seen over and over the comparison of Tate Martell with Quinn Ewers. So for his sake, I hope that's not necessarily the case. But I think overall, Mark, if you're starting 2 or 3 true freshmen, even redshirt freshmen to that extent, on the offensive line, that spells trouble. So I think this team, Mark, has the opportunity. I think they're probably an 8-4 team, but I could see a situation where that could go downhill. They're just going to have to, if they can survive Alabama. I mean, I think that's all. I mean, if you can survive Alabama without being completely embarrassed and injury-free after that game, I mean, you have to consider that a success based on where they're at from an offensive line perspective. and you going up against Dallas Turner and Will Anderson in potentially your second college game of your career is very, very difficult. But yeah, I mean, I think they still have a lot of talent. So I think there's 8 wins on this schedule, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if things go bad, they still struggle from a quarterback perspective. Defense is just as bad as last year. Offensive line continues to play bad as they were last year, and then what they've been doing in fall and what's been happening in fall camp could see them drop down to 7-5 or 6-6.
We had our Texas guy on here. I apologize, I can't remember his name because he's only been on once, but we brought him on here. We talked some Texas football, about 6 weeks ago, and he was just adamant with me when he had me on his channel that there is no way that Texas can possibly lose more than 2 games. That I was out of my mind saying that I would take the under of 9.5. But I will stand firm on that one until I see otherwise. And then, hey, if I got to throw up my hands at the end of the year and say, hey, Texas went 10-2, maybe they've turned a corner. I was wrong. I'll take that chance. All right. Now we're down to these fun. And I got to tell you, the one thing about the Alabama game, you make a great point, because that can kind of wreck a season. I don't want to blow it out of proportion. Maybe wreck a few weeks, like morally beat down a team that, Alabama's not going to morally beat down Utah State in week 1, because Utah State could lose that game 55-3. They'll go back to the Mountain West. They'll do their thing. They're a good team. They know where they stand. But Texas thinks we're Texas. And Alabama's one of the few, and maybe the only team, I will say this about, Jason, it might be worse for Texas to be playing that game at home, because Alabama at home might just be comfortable and we'll win this game by 2 touchdowns and we're fine. But they may be actually sharper facing a hostile crowd. We got to be on point. Saban may just blast it into their heads. This crowd's going to be on you. We need to be laser focused. And they may come in there and just.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and they're going to, to your point about Saban, they're going to want to make a statement on national television. I think maybe the only saving grace that Texas has is its 11 a.m. kickoff. I mean, maybe, I don't know if that helps or, helps them, or maybe takes a little bit of maybe it hurts them. I don't know. But I think, from a crowd perspective, but yeah, they're going to want to make a statement, and you think it's going to be their first, national chance. I mean, to your point about Utah State, Utah State's a nice team for the Mountain West, but they don't have the athletes up front. But when you look at, when you look at this, Mark, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It probably would be better if it was maybe at Alabama, but they as much as I believe in Ohio State, they have they have a big chip on the shoulder. So does Alabama for losing that last game. So yeah, it's not. I don't think it's going to be pretty. So I mean, unfortunately, with these national games, you like to see them obviously competitive, but yeah, it'll be the places where Texas struggles the most, I think, are the places where Alabama's much better, right? I mean, specifically when you look at offensive line versus what Alabama's defensive line looks like.
Yeah, that's not where you want to be trying to figure things out with young players, with Will Anderson and Dallas Turner and that bunch. Oh my goodness, that Alabama defense. I don't know if statistically they're going to match it, but I think they're going to be the Georgia version of 2022. I think they're going to be the best defense in the country.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Now we get to the interesting part, because we got 3 that, could be razor close. So at the 3 position.
Yeah, and Mark is a testament to this. We talked this morning, and I've kind of flip-flopped with Baylor and Oklahoma State and Oklahoma a little bit, just thinking of where all 3 of these programs are in relation to last year to this year, and there's just so much newness, I think, with the Oklahoma State side, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, where you've got Derek Mason in for Jim Knowles. Now, I don't know that there's necessarily a huge drop off from a defensive coordinator perspective, but they did lose a ton in the second in the back half of the defense at the linebacker position and the secondary specifically. I think they're going to be maybe the best front 4 in the conference on defense. But then you take what does that look like? How good are they going to be able to be defensively in the back end? And then it's fairly the same conversation that you would have with an Adrian Martinez. How much do you trust Spencer Sanders Right. And then, but I think that one of the differences for me is Oklahoma State's schedule. You go, to Baylor, to Kansas State, to TCU, and to Oklahoma. I think those games, and then you've got Tech. You host Texas again if you want to kind of look into that those in terms of their schedule. So three of their probably top four um, games are on the road. So I think the schedule is one of those that's a little bit of a determining factor for me, as well as kind of the secondary and just the trust in what Spencer Sanders brings to you.
So that is the team that lost the Big 12 championship game, of course, on the last play of the game. Last won it in 2011. And there we have the defending Big 12 champions and Sugar Bowl champs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Baylor's going to be the best defensive team in the Big 12. I think overall defensive team. Love Dave Aranda. Love him as a coach. Love a lot of what he stands for. Probably, one of my favorite coaches. I mean, he's very, he's very quiet. He's very unassuming, but I think he's been through his career. Then obviously what he was able to turn around and just his second year, his first full year, if you want to take into the COVID situation into the consideration for 2021. I'm sorry, 2020. But I think Shapen, the fact that he won the job in the spring, it shows a lot, just in terms of him. I don't know, defensive line, linebacker, the back end of the defense, they have to they lose a little bit. Interesting to see how they how they replace that there. And I mean, I hate to make it more simplistic than it really is, but I think they go to Oklahoma on November 5th, and then they finish the season at Texas. From a scheduling perspective, they go to Iowa State, just like Oklahoma does as well, but and then they do get an opportunity to host Oklahoma State. They've got a little bit of a tricky non-conference game as they go to BYU towards the I think it's the second week in the season. So yeah, I mean, you can obviously make a huge case for Baylor at one, but and many people have. I think it's I think really taking the crimson colored glasses off, so to speak, as then you look at this team and it has everything that you want out of a team. But again, this is almost the Iowa State situation here to a lesser degree, right? I mean, Baylor's a team that maybe a few times over the last 10, 12 years that they're used to being on top, but they're not necessarily used to this about with Dave Aranda. So how does that play into effect? And so almost a flip of the coin, Mark. But I think the difference was I think just going on the road to Oklahoma, just some of the trickier games that they have on the road as well. I think just give Oklahoma the slight edge, and then knowing that they're going to play again.
Baylor also loses 2,400 yards in rushing with Abram Smith and Tristan Ebner and 14 touchdowns. They also lose 4 of their top 5 pass receivers. They lose their top tackler, their top sack guy, their top interceptor on defense. But Dave Aranda usually fixes defense pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And to number 1, we've got OU.
So yeah, again, Mar, we've talked about a lot of these things with Oklahoma. I think there's a lot of intangibles that I really like about this Oklahoma program going into the season under Venables. I think they've had a renewed excitement in playing football. I think they've had renewed they've been pushed a lot harder than they ever have been. At least these guys that are probably on campus now, with with the new culture, with the accountability, with the the strength and conditioning side, with a lot of the physicality that they played with. One thing that was noted, that's been noted through the spring and through the fall campus, most people that are able to watch them think that this is going to be a much better tackling team, and that's been part of the problem on the defensive side of the ball. Over the course of the last decade, or even longer, is not tackling fundamentally well. And so, with that being said, you've got a much bigger, a much more physical, football team. Now, this is what I'll say. They do have a couple of very tricky little segments of their schedule, that you could see, you could see them tripping up a time or two. We've talked a lot about this. I think that Nebraska game is going to be a springboard one way or the other. If Oklahoma wins that game fairly easily, I mean, when I say easily, 10 to 14 points or more, then I think that springboards this team into a very positive way. But you've got at Nebraska. Then the following week you host Kansas State, and we talked about them. Obviously, you go to TCU, and then you have Texas. That's a tricky, tricky four game stretch there, and then you've got another 4-game stretch when you go to Iowa State, you host Baylor, you go to West Virginia, and you host Oklahoma State. So I don't think this team's going undefeated. I think you probably have. I think the ceiling, I would say, is probably overall 11-1 right now. I think the floor is probably 9-3. For this team, but I have them probably somewhere in between. Around, I think when you look at this, when the standings are at the end of the year, I think both Oklahoma and Baylor are 10-2, or what? I'm not sure what that would be in conference play. I guess that would be 7-2, right? Both 7-2 in conference play, but I think Oklahoma gets the edge over the head-to-head victory over Baylor.
And we talk recruiting rankings on a regular basis, and I just checked out Baylor's over the last 4 years. They've built this championship caliber team with recruiting classes ranked between 40 and 51 in the country. Yeah, Dave Randick can coach.